Welcome to this explainer. We're jumping right into the absolutely wild life of a man who literally survived his way into inventing modern sociology and economics. We are talking about a scholar who didn't just sit around writing history, he lived it, he shaped it, and he analyzed it with a kind of scientific precision that was centuries ahead of his time. Let's get into it.
Okay, wrap your head around this premise for a second. It's so easy to think of economics and sociology as these super modern sciences, right? Conceived by guys in powdered wigs or tweed jackets in places like London or Paris. But what if I told you the foundational theories of these fields were actually mapped out by a 14th century North African scholar named Ibn Khaldun? We're going to see how ideas from the 1300s are still echoing loudly in our modern world today. And to prove it, let's look at a remarkably modern quote.
So, it's 1962, and President John F. Kennedy is making a really passionate case for tax cuts. He's arguing that restrictive tax rates actually lower government revenue, while lower rates stimulate the economy. But here is the crazy part. When JFK said taxation yields small revenue from large assessments, he was literally directly quoting the genius of a Muslim philosopher who lived 600 years before him. To figure out how these brilliant theories were born, we have to start with one of the most intense, cinematic moments of Ibn Khaldun's life.
Picture this, it's January 1401. The ancient, proud city of Damascus is completely surrounded, totally locked down, and under a terrifying siege. Inside the city walls is our scholar Ibn Khaldun, and he's nearly 70 years old at this point. Recognizing that the city leaders are just paralyzed by indecision, he realizes he has to take matters into his own hands. But the gates are locked tight to keep the invaders out, so this elderly scholar literally has himself lowered down the towering city walls in a basket.
And who was waiting for him at the bottom? The army of Tamerlane. This was the brilliant, ruthless Mongol conqueror who was just sweeping across the globe, leaving absolutely destroyed empires in his wake. Ibn Khaldun was risking his life just to secure safe conduct. But what started as a desperate plea for survival turned into something totally unprecedented. When he was brought to Tamerlane's tent, it sparked a 35-day historical seminar between the world's most feared warlord and its greatest intellect. But you've got to wonder, how did Ibn Khaldun get the courage and the knowledge to speak to a conqueror like that? Well, if you look at the timeline of his life, you see how chaos perfectly prepared him for that exact moment. Born in Tunis in 1332 to a family of political elites, he spent his entire life navigating the incredibly treacherous waters of medieval politics. He was a counselor, a diplomat, a judge. He survived political prisons in Fez, shipwrecks that tragically claimed his own family, and constantly shifting allegiances among rival warlords. It just proves that his theories weren't born in some quiet, isolated ivory tower. They were forged in the fires of real-world observation and intense personal survival.
Eventually, though, all that political tightrope walking gets to be a bit much. So in 1375, seeking a break from the endless intrigue, he took his family and retreated to a remote castle in Algeria. And for 4 years, he secluded himself and poured his lifetime of intense experiences into a massive, groundbreaking masterpiece. It was meant to be an introduction to a universal history of the world, and today we know it simply as the Muqaddimah.
Within the pages of the Muqaddimah, he did something no one had ever done before. He completely revolutionized how we study history. Before him, history was honestly often just a collection of chronological myths, highly exaggerated troop numbers, and unverified rumors. But Ibn Khaldun introduced a strict scientific method. He argued that historians absolutely must reject idle superstition. They need to search for the how and why of events, and most importantly, they have to discover the underlying laws that govern human society. He wasn't just recording what happened, he was decoding why it happened.
And the absolute core of his entire philosophy rests on this one brilliant concept, Asabiyyah. It roughly translates to social cohesion or group solidarity. Ibn Khaldun realized that this intangible feeling of unity is the invisible glue that determines the rise and fall of absolutely every single society in human history. Without it, you just have a fragmented crowd, but with it, you have an unstoppable force capable of building an empire.
So how does a group get that cohesion? He systematically broke down the mechanics into 3 main drivers: kinship, religion, and leadership. Kinship forms the bedrock, those tight familial and tribal bonds where your survival literally depends on your neighbor. Religion then acts as this incredible multiplier, uniting completely disparate groups under shared transcendent beliefs. And finally, leadership gives that massive collective energy a specific direction and a goal.
This brilliantly illustrates his cyclical model of history. It's like clockwork. It starts when a tough, nomadic group with really strong Asabiyyah forms on the edge of an empire. Because they're so united, they easily conquer the soft, decaying center and form a new dynasty. But here's the catch. Success becomes their undoing. As they settle into cities and start enjoying wealth and luxury, those tight social bonds naturally begin to erode. People become self-interested, the Asabiyyah fades, the civilization declines, and eventually they are conquered by a brand new, hungry group from the periphery. It is a continuous, inevitable cycle.
Let's shift gears a bit and see how this builds into his groundbreaking economic frameworks. Because he realized the rise and fall of civilizations wasn't just about military might. It was heavily dictated by money, trade, and productivity. This deep understanding easily makes him the true father of economics, literally centuries before names like Adam Smith or John Maynard Keynes even existed. It is incredible to think he laid out these foundational economic pillars in the 1300s. He systematically analyzed supply and demand, how the cost of production affects pricing, and the sheer power of specialization and divided labor. He clearly understood that a civilization's well-being relies entirely on productivity and that humans are naturally driven by their own profit motives. If people know they can keep the fruits of their labor, they're going to produce more, driving the entire society upward.
Building on that, he laid out a vision for the ideal state economy, heavily favoring minimal intervention. He argued vehemently that the state's primary role in the economy should basically just be establishing law and order and strictly protecting property rights. He warned that rulers should never get involved in commercial trading themselves. Why? Because government bureaucrats just lack the genuine profit motivations of actual tradesmen, and the state's immense power easily crushes private competition.
And this is where we circle right back to JFK. Comparing an early and late dynasty reveals Ibn Khaldun's approach to taxation. In an early, healthy dynasty, taxes are low, which encourages massive business growth, ultimately yielding a huge amount of total tax revenue. But as the dynasty ages and gets addicted to luxury, they crank taxes sky high. This crushes the profit motive. Businesses shut down, and total tax revenue actually plummets. He literally outlined the concept of the Laffer curve, a staggering 600 years before Arthur Laffer supposedly drew it on a restaurant napkin.
He noted that the true death spiral of an empire really begins with an expanding bureaucracy. As rulers get used to luxury, they hire larger mercenary armies and bloated administrative staffs, and to pay for all that, they excessively tax their subjects. This overtaxation destroys the exact production that funds the empire in the first place. The superstructure of the society literally collapses under its own financial weight.
He was also a fierce defender of free markets against government price fixing. He famously pointed out that if a government uses its power to force sellers to lower their prices, basically buying things up at the cheapest possible rate, it entirely destroys the motivation to do business. When people stop producing because their property or profits are unjustly taken, the entire business of civilization just slumps and decays. Given all of this profound insight, it is absolutely no surprise that his scientific approach to human society directly inspired the absolute giants of modern Western sociology. When 19th and 20th century scholars finally translated and read the Muqaddimah, their jaws kind of dropped. Foundational thinkers like Max Weber, Arnold Toynbee, and Emil Durkheim all drew heavily upon Ibn Khaldun's frameworks regarding state formation, the cycles of civilizations, and the absolutely critical nature of social cohesion. So, keeping all that profound knowledge in mind, let's head back to that warlord's tent in 1401. Ibn Khaldun wasn't just a theorist, right? He was a practitioner. For 35 days, while the siege of Damascus raged outside, he sat with Tamerlane. He used his deep understanding of history, of tribal dynamics, and of Asabiyyah to navigate the incredibly complex psychology of a world conqueror. He actively flattered Tamerlane by recognizing his incredible tribal solidarity, all while carefully maneuvering to secure his own safety. And the way the meeting ended is just legendary. As they prepared to part ways, Tamerlane, who would go on to brutally sack the city by the way, offered to buy Ibn Khaldun's prestigious gray mule. Knowing the subtle power dynamics at play, Ibn Khaldun refused to stoop to a mere commercial transaction with a conqueror. Instead, he smoothly gifted the mule to Tamerlane as an act of homage. It was a brilliant diplomatic maneuver that secured him passports and safe passage right back to Egypt, where he finished his days peacefully as a judge. His legacy is just an incredible testament to the power of observation. He showed us that a life of intense political action and real-world survival can synthesize into timeless, world-changing intellectual theories.
He anticipated the foundational rules of economics, taxation, and sociology centuries before Europe even woke up to them. And he provided us with a timeless framework for understanding exactly how societies grow, peak, and ultimately decay.
Which brings us right to our own front door. Ibn Khaldun's theories are honestly just as alive now as they were in the 14th century. As we navigate our own era of rapid globalization, massive economic shifts, and deep political fragmentation, we have to look in the mirror. If Asabiyyah, that invisible feeling of group solidarity and mutual obligation, is truly the glue of civilization, are the bonds holding our communities together right now strong enough to survive? It's a pretty heavy question, but it's definitely one Ibn Khaldun would be asking. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.